A certain kind of girl joins Pi Theta sorority. A girl who likes to party and likes to get close to her friends. A girl whose extracurricular activities were more daring than most. A girl who could turn her fantasies into reality.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we're definitely the kind of girls who do a pact to cover up an accidental murder. I'm Anna Bogutska, co-founder of the Final Girls Collective and your podcast host. If you're new to the show, welcome. In real life, the Final Girls put on events and screenings that explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. And on the show, we're currently looking at some of the best teen horror movies ever made to see what they have in common, how well or how badly they've aged, and whether it's worth revisiting them now. The answer is usually yes. Which basically means that I talk to very smart and very funny women and non-binary folk about horror movies in depth. We're now fully in the 80s, a time when slasher films were being made left, right and center, often following the same formula, often referencing films that came before them that had been massive successes like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Black Christmas. And there's a particular subgenre to this subgenre of horror, which happens in sororities, those weird all-female spaces where girls are left to fend for themselves. The House on Sorority Row is one of those, and probably one of the best one of those sorority horror films. Before we dive into the film this week, a quick reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Final Girls UK for updates, event announcements, and a lot of pictures of Final Girls we like. We also have a Patreon where you can support our work, gain occasional bonus episodes. Back to today's episode. I'm joined by YouTube video essayist and writer Yara Zaid to go deep in on The House on Sorority Row, a perfect and surprisingly surreal entry into this subgenre of sorority horror. If you're new to the show and have never seen this film before, we do kind of spoil the entirety of the film from the very beginning, so if you're precious about that sort of stuff, maybe watch out. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on The House on Sorority Row.
Pi Theta was different from other sororities.
I'll get back at you for the last thing I do!
Because in this sorority, nothing is off limits, as long as it's fun for the girls. So when it came time to say goodbye, they decided to make real sure that no one would ever forget the girls in the House on Sorority Row.
Yara, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. How are you?
Oh my god, amazing is great. Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time and for coming on for the first time. I feel a little bit, not gonna lie, I feel a little bit starstruck because I love
oh my God.
your video essays. And I'm really pleased to be actually talking to you.
No, thank you so much for having me. Because I love this podcast. I recently got into it. And any talk that's horror talk, I'm all for. So I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so that's music to my ears. And since it's your first time guesting on the pod, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do and kind of what your relationship with horror is?
Yes. Okay. So I'm Yara Zaid. I'm a proud Atlantan, which is irrelevant, but home of Outcast, TLC, and Coca-Cola, which is great. And I'm a lover of anything that involves blood or glitter, or if I'm lucky, both. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about random movies. Nothing on there is consistent except for inconsistency. Sometimes I'm talking about horror movies. Other times, Hilary Duff's filmography. You never know what you're going to get. And as for horror, I'm a big cinephile, but horror is easily my favorite genre. It's just so comforting for me. I don't know why, but it is.
I think a lot of horror fans find the genre comforting. Especially, I don't know if you get this feeling, especially when it's the tropes and the rules and sometimes the repetition of certain horror films.
Oh my God, yeah.
You kind of know what's to come, so you feel a little bit like, okay, well, even though there's blood and gore and killers and people being chased down dark corridors and stuff involved, I kind of know what's going to happen. I can almost count down the beats to when the next kill or the next scare is going to be.
Yes. It's really, it's like a warm blanket. And whenever I used to get super stressed out or worried, I would immediately go to watch a horror movie and I would feel better.
Same. Do you have a comfort horror movie?
So when I was growing up, I have a few older brothers and one older sister, and we would always watch slashers together, even when I was way too young to be watching slashers. And one of them that we really liked was Scream. So Scream is a go-to. Whenever I'm having a bad day, I just watch Scream. It just has a special place in my heart. Everything about it.
Oh, I love that. And actually, coincidentally, I mean, we're recording this a few days before it's due to go out. And tomorrow, we're actually doing, myself and two friends of the pod are doing a live podcast about Scream, following a screening of Scream at a cinema in London.
Goodness. Amazing. Doesn't that, it turns 25 this year, right?
It does, yeah.
I love being the same age as my favorite movies. It's amazing. I love it.
I do not. I do not. I would like them to stay like 27 forever. and I'm not even 27, but that's like the age today I'm in my mind. It's like, no, done. There's no more movies being made, no more people being born.
Period.
No more 50 or 30-year-old anniversaries. No. We stayed here.
Freeze time.
Exactly. So, Yara, the reason I reached out to you to talk about this movie in particular, about the house on Sorority Row, is because you did this amazing takeover of our Instagram where you talked about sorority horror.
Yes.
So
yes, I love sorority horror. I don't think early on in my horror aficionado career, let's call it a career, I guess, that I realized sorority horror was a thing. But you watch Black Christmas, you watch The House on Sorority Row, you watch The Initiation, and you sort of start to see a theme there. And I found that theme very fascinating. It was like late last year, I was really getting into it. And so when I was approached to do the takeover for the Instagram account, that was the theme that I knew I wanted to do. I was really excited about it.
And I love these sort of like kismet situations where you pick that theme, and we had just started doing the teen horror series, and I didn't have anyone to talk about the house on Sorority Row. Sorry, oh my god, why can't I pronounce row?
It's so tricky. It's okay.
And I didn't have anyone to talk about the house on Sorority Row. I'm just gonna go with it. You know what? I'm just gonna leave this in.
It's okay. I find it very, I get it, because I feel like I said a couple of times when I meant to say bro.
Listeners, it's going to be a constant. Just deal with it. So before, I want to ask you about kind of the similarities and the themes that you've seen in sorority horror, but let's get into this film proper. And for anyone who perhaps has not seen it in a while or hasn't seen it before, how would you summarize The House on Sorority Row?
Ooh, okay. So the seniors of this sorority, Pi Theta, they have graduated and they're moving on to the next phase of their lives. And they want to have this badass going away celebratory bash. And they decide to throw it at their sorority house, even though their house mother, Slater, is not having it. Bad blood has been growing between them and their house mother for a while now. She's very strict and no nonsense. And after she catches one of the girls, Vicky, with her boyfriend and crosses a line by slashing her waterbed, they decide to play a harmless prank on her, but it ends up fatal. So the girls decide to cover up their crime, hide the body, and go along with the party. But what they don't realize is that there's a loose end, and they're basically all fucked. That's how I would describe it. It's a great... I don't know. There's just a lot about this movie that is very different, approaches slashers differently. that I really appreciate. But we're going to get into that, I assume.
So when did you first watch this film, and like how did you feel about it when you first watched it, and has that changed for you since you revisited?
So I think my first viewing was either senior year of high school or freshman year of college. It could have been the summer in between for all I know, somewhere in there. And I don't know if I really appreciated it that much back then. I thought it was good, but it wasn't, I wouldn't rank it high or anything. But then when I revisited it like 2 or 3 years ago, I thought, holy shit, this is amazing. This is a film noir. This is a vengeance story. This is a crime thriller. And there's so many techniques that are done in the film, like certain pans. There's surreal moments that I find very refreshing.
One thing that you just mentioned that I've wanted to pick you up on is that it kind of feels, and I agree with you, it does feel like both very much a slasher of its time, of the early 80s, kind of capitalizing on the popularity of slashers and teen-centric horror films at that time, and at the same time feels very weirdly different in kind of small ways. So how do you feel it's different from other slashers?
Well, I think it's part of that film noir sensibility, because when I was watching it, I mean, yeah, like you said, it definitely felt like a slasher. But there were certain things like even the characters, they have this culpability, right? So they're not just hapless victims that violence is being thrust upon. They play a hand in their fate almost. And then you have the complexity of like, who is actually the villain here? Because like, okay, so Eric, is it too early to get into this?
No, get into it.
Okay. So it's funny because Eric is the one doing everything, taking everyone down. But if you were to shift the perspective and look at it from his point of view, this is like a classic revenge thriller story. Eric is getting his old boy on, you know? And from their perspective, the girls, it's a slasher. So I think there's just levels to it that makes it very distinct. And then the film noir aspect, the score has these like low brassy instrumentals. There's a lot of focus on these dark long shadows. It feels very reminiscent of like The Third Man, and I think that those influences make it very distinct.
It does feel like, I mean, I really want to talk about the kind of who's the villain thing about this film, because that is the thing that I definitely didn't appreciate about it from the first time I watched it. Again, one of these kind of 80s horror films that I don't even remember watching, but I definitely know I'd seen before because I remember images from it. But it is this kind of, I can see that it both tries to do the same, take the elements that were working from the very popular, successful slashers of the time, you know, the masked killer, the teen girls all kind of huddled together, the sorority environment, the kind of very contained, no adults allowed zone, really, of that environment. And at the same time, it's got the Friday the 13th vibes with the menacing older lady, the mother with Slater as well. And she's positioned as a killer, but she isn't really.
Yeah.
So it's kind of trying to do a lot of things at the same time, which makes it quite morally messy as opposed to very straightforward.
Oh my God, yes. It's like the biggest thing that I took away from especially the sorority, the girls, was that it's the question of, is loyalty more important than morality? Because they keep this secret, this bond between them, because they feel indebted to one another, and also because, of course, they don't want to get in trouble. But it's also, that question is lingering. Should we do the right thing, or should we protect one another? And so the whole movie is this moral conundrum, and I love it.
And it's also a moral conundrum in an all-female space. Like, essentially, aside from the boyfriends or the dates or the guys who just turn up at the party and want to, like the guy who wants to jump in the pool and then just says, "I'm a sea pig." That's all.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I mean, that is like a screenshot right there. But and also me, every time I take a bath now, I'm just going to be like...
That's such a great moment. Because like I was so on edge before he said that. Then he said it, and I was like, oh my God. I just started laughing. I had to stop it for a second. Like, my goodness, I didn't see that coming.
I love that guy. But aside from them and like Dr. Beck, who we'll talk about later for sure, and Eric, it's very much an all-female space, both
Yes.
morally and literally. And I wanted to pick you up kind of on this idea of sorority horror or dorm slashers, I guess, kind of how, and you mentioned that you're working on a video essay about them. Kind of what are the traits of this? Would you call it a subgenre?
I would definitely call it a subgenre. I think it's interesting because, okay, so slight digression.
Mm-hmm.
Last year I covered teen girls coming of age and their like burgeoning womanhood being symbolized through physiological metamorphosis.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of like video essays and essays in general and analysis that you could look at as reference points.
Mm-hmm.
But for sorority horror, even though it's as, I would say, on the same level as the coming of age monstrous subgenre as far as the number of films it contains,
Mm-hmm.
you can't find that many analysis on it. It's quite sparse. And I think part of the reason is because the subgenre is really varied in its themes. So you have like your science fiction horror, like Night of the Creeps, and you have the ones that focus on secrecy and question loyalty, like The House on Sorority Row.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have something like Black Christmas, which I think you could look at in a number of ways, where it's just this intruder sort of invading upon a harmonious female space and what that might represent in like womanhood in
Mm-hmm.
general society and stuff. So the main traits are kind of complicated, because you can't narrow it down to any single one.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That's a really good question.
I mean, one of the things that you were mentioning that I do find very interesting about them, and I was debating when I was putting together the list for this series on teen horror, is like what makes a teen in horror, because sometimes we do get this kind of in-between phases of life and also phases of the movies where it's like, well, when they're in a sorority, they're like in 18, 19, maybe 20, 21 max.
Yeah.
And they're still kind of stuck in that in-between limbo between teenhood and adulthood, but they do have more freedoms now, which is a great breeding ground for horror films.
It's amazing.
When the adults are like just not part of the picture at all. And often they're not just not any help, like they're not in this film, but they're also kind of the menacing figures.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that I find really, really interesting. And also because sororities and frat houses are very gendered. Like frat houses are for boys, and that's what we've learned from American movies. And
right.
sororities are
oh
the
my
girly
god!
version.
So it's funny how like, right, the sororities. Okay, so sorority horror is the thing, right? Fraternity horror isn't that much of a thing. Most of the time, when you get movies about fraternities, they're comedies.
Yes.
They're pretty lighthearted,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's like an independent film, like Goat or
Mm-hmm.
Burning Sands, which focus on some of the fucked up things that happen in
Mm-hmm.
fraternities. But most of the time for sororities, you get the horror movies to
Mm-hmm.
explore female bonds and things like that.
So let's get into kind of the women that make up this particular sorority. What did you think of all the different girls? We've got Katie, we've got Vicky, kind of as the, I guess, the de facto leaders and each other's antagonists.
Yeah. It's funny because the second time that I watched it, I actually took notes,
Mm-hmm.
and I was interested in the dynamic between Vicky and Katie, and it's sort of this antithesis, right? And how, even though it's, I don't know, it's different. It's the same as other slashers, but we've already established it's kind of has a thing that makes it very distinctive. It reminds me of the play of opposites of like you have your final girl,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have your I call it the second to last girl who is not like, she's the exact opposite of the final girl in terms of morals and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dynamic there, it was interesting. It was like I kept thinking, would the other girls have survived if they had listened to Katie more? Is this sort of, I don't know, representing what a woman should be and what she shouldn't be? Should we not be like Vicky? Should we be more like Katie? Because if we're like Vicky, we're going to get killed. And that goes back to like what makes a final girl and how I love final girls. I think they're amazing. But you do have to sort of think about how initially when they came to be, it was sort of built up on almost like purity culture. So she has to be a virgin. She can't drink. And like Katie, I don't think she even acknowledges her date that much. Speaking of her date, oh my God, I was watching this movie and I felt so bad for him. I was like, you don't know what you're getting into. You just came here for a blind date. You did not know you were going to get tranquilized by the end of the night.
I know, bless him. And he's so nice. He's like, oh, would you like a drink? Would you like a dance?
He's trying so hard.
At one point, they're slow dancing and Katie is literally looking over her shoulder. It's like, he could just as well be just a plank of wood. And he's like, oh, this is going so well. I'm so glad to have met you. Oh, baby boy, no.
It's like, you just want to tell him, listen, I got some news for you. What was his name? Peter?
Yeah.
I got some news for you, Peter. You don't know what you just walked into. You might want to leave this party right now.
Yeah, I don't think this is worth it for you, Pete. No.
But yeah, that was the thing that really stuck out to me as far as like the archetypes that they represent, you know? And yeah, I was really stuck on that.
The thing that really struck me was actually how vicious Vicky was. So you mentioned that like they play a prank on Slater, and there's the prank that they kind of all agree on, which was just to leave her walking cane on the pool and kind of make her get it, which is cruel but kind of harmless. But then Vicky pulls out a gun, and it's pretty clear that she hasn't told anyone about this.
This is the extreme part of her plan that she decided to keep from everyone else for the element of surprise. Except for that, who's the girl who pretended she got shot in the ankle?
Oh, yeah, that girl. Oh, I forgot her name.
You know what? It's funny. I don't really remember most of their names.
Yeah, same. Except Vicky and Katie. The rest of them are kind of, I can see their outfits in my head, but I cannot remember their names.
You know who I liked? I liked the girl who was singing right before she, the attic fell open on her. I just thought she was so funny for some reason. She didn't say anything that was like a punchline, but I was like laughing every time she was on screen.
I really like the girl who, when she was wearing very, very short shorts and like heeled sandals when they were doing the prank, and Vicky was ordering her around to just run, go get something. Yeah. And she just seemed very confused as to where she was. She was like, how does one run? I missed that class.
Is that, do you do it with your chest or how do you?
I loved how vicious Vicky was. Like, she's basically, all of this revenge is because Slater kind of humiliated her in the middle of having sex with her boyfriend.
It's interesting, even though Vicky is, well, I wouldn't call her a villain, but I would call her a villain, like the intonation's different, an antagonist. Yeah. And I liked that about her too. It was just this intensity. And I think the reason I enjoyed it was it goes back to these predominantly female spaces.
Yes.
And you look at slashers, especially in this particular era. And I don't know, you have this idea that horror takes pleasure in victimizing women. And so when you have most of your characters as women, you have the responsibility to write them as a little bit more complex and fully formed. And so Vicky is she's not just a hapless victim, and that's what I liked about her. It's sort of this spite that drives her.
Yeah, she's very spiteful. She's clearly conniving. And I got the sense from her that she kind of looks down on her sorority sisters in a way. Like this sort of bond that they have, this clique that they have is a tension as well. between the leadership of Vicky, which is more ruthless, and the leadership of Katie, which is
Mm-hmm.
more moral and kind of down to earth and sensible. So it really felt like at one point the rest of the girls would have to pick sides.
Yeah. I mean, eventually. Unfortunately, they didn't really get a shot at that.
No, they really didn't. Vicky prevailed. But we did kind of also mention at the start that this film really does try to position Slater as the villain and potentially, arguably, the killer as well, although we know that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And we even get kind of this little flashback to a younger Slater to establish her as a, as a madwoman, as a hag in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. And what did you make of her as the quote unquote villain of this? One of them.
You know, when I was watching it, I could see that was the direction they were going in, for sure. But I felt, well, not entirely. For the most part, I felt a lot of sympathy towards her. But there is, aspects to her behavior. Like, she slut shames Vicky.
Mm-hmm.
She's very conservative. But for the most part, I was just thinking, this guy, this guy, this woman just wants to be with her kid. And she wants these girls out of the house.
And super secretive as well. Like this, the forcing of the girls out of the house, without ever explaining why, just being kind of extremely strict about it and be like, no, you just gotta get the fuck out before the 19th of June, I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Juneteenth, very interesting.
So true. But we kind of mentioned this at the start of our convo, but who do you think is the real villain of the film? And I don't mean the killer, I mean the villain.
Right. So, okay. So I really marinated on this for quite a bit. And I think I'm going to go with Dr. Beck. And I think he's an interesting villain because in comparison with everything going on, it's pretty easy for him to like fade into the background. But most of what happens is it's kind of spurred on because of his actions years ago, because he wants to play God. And actually, there's a YouTuber, I think it's Cherry Bepsy, if I'm not mistaken. And they posed the question about overlooked horror tropes that deserve a deeper look. And one of the things they had mentioned was the scientist character who wants to play God and experiment with people's lives, and how there's quite a few movies where a villain comes to be thanks to lawless scientists. Quite a few zombie apocalypses begin that way. Then you have Frankenstein, of course.
The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Right.
Yeah.
They start this whole thing, but by the end, there's not much done with them because the bigger villain becomes the thing that they created. So, I don't know. I kind of think like Eric murdering people is weirdly justified. Because most of it is vengeance, even though he does catch, like, he gets one person who had nothing to do with anything in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and I have to go with Dr. Beck because, but I don't know. There are a lot of villains though, which is what makes it such an enthralling viewing experience. Like, what the hell is going on?
But also, I agree with you because he's the only one who's sort of consciously doing those things, like on purpose. And there's a particular scene that really kind of, I think, stood out for me both visually or narratively with Dr. Beck, because he's very much kind of ingraining himself in the lives of these girls when they come to him for help, pretending to be a savior, pretending to be like a good man, like, the figure of authority. You trust a doctor. We're all taught to trust doctors,
right? And
he's using that, and at the same time, you're right, like it's his experimenting that creates Eric, and that creates the trauma for Slater that arguably kind of exacerbates how uptight and judgmental she is.
Exactly. It just like carries through from that incident.
And also, like, I don't know if you thought about this, but I saw Eric in a way, maybe this is a little bit disparaging for him, and I'm sorry, Eric, but the whole sort of like clown mask, the fact that we never see him, the fact that he's the son of this, maligned woman, that's very Friday the 13th. We're kind of mentioned that he's not quote unquote like normal kid, so he's already positioned as differently abled. So by that default in horror movies of the time, it's like, well, we should be afraid of him, which is fucked up on another level. But
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. But
yeah,
it's very fucked up.
but we never really get much of Eric. Like, we never see his face or hear him speak, and he's just kind of this killing machine, but doesn't have even sort of his preferred instrument, like say Michael Myers has or something like that.
Right.
And he never becomes such a, not to overuse the word iconic, but kind of the visual killer of this film. He always seemed to me, rewatching this movie, as kind of more of an instrument that's being played around with different people.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. It's interesting that you said instrument though, because that's what was my part of my reasoning for seeing Dr. Beck as the villain, was that I feel like he's just played so many people.
Yeah.
and Eric, even though I know they don't have like a strong relationship, Eric and Dr. Beck. It's more like experimenter and experimented on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I was thinking too. It's just Eric kind of, even though he's doing these killings and everything, he does fall into the background, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Like his actions take a bigger role than actually his person does, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But the scene that I think really cemented that for me, and that I was referencing earlier, is the very like surreal scene where Dr. Beck ties Katie to an armchair and sedates her and literally puts her in front of the door like bait.
Oh my God. I was not expecting that. I was, I don't know. It was a strange moment, like viewing wise, because I was thinking, for Katie, get out of there. But I was also thinking, hey, maybe this is going to work. But no, the surreal elements were still some of my favorite parts, because I think up until that point, there's no surreal elements. So you would think it would feel misplaced or something. It wouldn't work. But it felt like it was supposed to be there. And it also added, I feel like, a lot of tension to the moment. Like, I'm pretty sure I was like leaning forward in my seat with my mouth hanging open. Like, what's going to happen? Is this real? No, it's not real. And like all of her sorority sisters saying they were waiting for her was a nice touch. Really added to the fear.
It was like very... Because it felt like, well, I think that's for me the thing that really makes this film different from other slashers of the time, is that it kind of leads into this very almost old-fashioned visual surrealism in a way, like the sort that I remember really liking from films of the 40s and the 50s, where it's kind of very within the old Hollywood machinery and the old Hollywood style, but at the same time, then it goes into this weird other world with whatever tools they have at the time. And it still works because it pulls you out of that expectation of what a slasher is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wait, hold on. You're going a little bit like Dali-esque here. You're doing some weird things. She's hallucinating. There's all these colors playing on her face. And I also love this thing that Katie is so desperately trying to stay awake. She's been forcibly sedated by Dr. Beck. And you just know, when you know the feeling you get sometimes when you're really tired and you like your brain and your body just want to shut down and go to sleep because you need rest, but for whatever reason you need to stay awake and stay focused.
Yeah. And
everything just kind of goes fuzzy. And I think they got that feeling, that sensation so well in this part of the film, combined with all your sorority sisters have been murdered and maybe you're about to be murdered. So there's a lot to deal with here for Katie.
Yeah, I feel like, when she's trying to move and she's sort of dragging herself, you can feel her weight almost. Like,
yes.
Like her trying to, like struggling to get up the stairs, struggling to make all these moves. It just, I don't know. It was played very well.
And it's the thing that really kind of, because it's sort of bloodless as well. Like there's quite a bit of gore in this film, but those scenes are...
the toilet. I love that. Oh my God. I did not expect that the first time I watched it. I was like, holy shit.
What did you make? So like on that topic, what did you make of the actual slasher violence of this film?
You know, so when it first started, I was thinking it was going to be like gentle violence.
Mm-hmm.
You know how like some horror movies, the violence happens, but it doesn't really feel like it's affecting you in any way.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, I thought it was neat. Even like, you know, there's moments where it's definitely an 80s movie, like when I think the knife goes through one of the girl's hands and you can see that it's like a really interestingly made prosthetic hand that looks very fake.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's not her real hand, but you're like, oh, then you know what? I A for effort. I like that. And but then you have the head in the toilet, and I was like, okay, so wait, because that looked really real, you know? So how do you have that hand? And then you have this great looking, terrifying head.
So I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think they probably did the same trick as they did in Prom Night. Have you seen that film?
Yes, the good one. Not the yeah.
Yes, the good one. The one with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yes.
Yeah, because it has that thing with the head as well. It's quite tame in its violence, and then suddenly you get like a very intense beheading scene and then a shot of a very realistic looking head. And that was made by putting the actor like underneath a platform. So I think that might be the real actress kind of hiding underneath the fake toilet, because it looks way too real.
It was fantastic. And
good.
I will say, like, having a moment of gore like that, you really don't need a lot of gore for it to be effective. So you have all this sort of, it sounds really weird to say gentle violence, but like gentle violence. And then you have that moment like in your face, and then it just racks up the tension and your nervousness even more.
Mm-hmm.
I really think, you know, you should use gore like that. Not should, but if it's not your forte, use it sparingly and it becomes really effective like that.
It does. I agree with you, because you kind of, at this point in the film, you feel comfortable with the levels of violence or explicitness that it's going to show you. And like we were talking at the start, as much as I think horror fans, we love how predictable some genres or subgenres are, when they catch us out by surprise, I think we kind of love it even more, because then we're like, oh, you outsmarted me. Okay.
Yes.
I see what you're doing.
That's the fun, because it's like, it's familiar, but not entirely.
Exactly.
And like a little bit of spice, a little bit of a kick.
Yeah, a little bit of a severed head. Why not?
Yeah. Some garnish. A garnish severed head.
Yeah, a little bit of decapitation is just like a little bit of parsley on top of anything. Always goes well.
Just to mix it up a little bit.
I have a very bad habit, Yara, of comparing films with food, and sometimes it is not appropriate. I'm sorry.
No, but I love it though, because you know there is. I mean, I have to ask you like later. I'm gonna have to throw movies at you and see what dishes you would describe them as, because I think that's fascinating. It kind of fits. Like, it makes sense. So what kind of a dish is the good prom night?
Oh, ooh. Okay, I think the good prom night is like a crispy pork belly.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I don't
that
know
makes sense. Okay.
I don't know why this is the first thing that comes to mind, but it does.
What about the bad prom night? What kind of dish is that?
Like boiled tongue without any seasoning.
Oh yeah. Okay. You see, you're really good at this. Oh my god. That's how I would describe it.
Oh my god. I remember reviewing a very bad romantic period drama a few months ago, and for some reason when I was watching it, it was making me so angry because it was so insipid. And then when I was reviewing it, I just called it a salad without any seasoning or without any dressing.
Well, sometimes I think it makes sense to make that comparison, because not everyone is a lover of movies, right?
That's right. True.
But everyone eats food. So if you say this movie is as bad as this dish, then people are like, holy shit, that's really bad. That makes sense.
So how would you describe the house in Sorority Row?
You mean like just like my feelings on it, or
No, it's like a dish.
oh, I'm not as good as this as you are. Hold on, this is my first time. Let's see.
Take your time. We can come back to it later.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. I'm gonna marinate on it.
Literally, I feel like it might be something marinated.
It could be. Oh my god, what if it's no? It can't be that. I was just gonna say, what if it's just pickles?
Well, like
Yeah.
sweet and sour pickles?
Yeah,
Okay. I mean, I will never reject like deep fried sweet and sour pickles.
it could be deep fried. I don't see why not.
I love a deep fried pickle.
I've never had a deep fried pickle.
I thought it sounded like an abomination when I first saw it on a menu, and then I tried it with a friend on a dare, and then we both became obsessed with deep fried pickles.
Oh, see, I love that. I love lovely stories like that when you go into something thinking it's going to be disgusting and then it's great. Like with movies, with food. I love it.
But back to the film itself. One of the things that we were kind of chatting before we started recording and throughout this conversation, we've peppered it to kind of older references and the director, I love that he spoke about kind of being inspired by Le Diabolique for some of the scenes, the 1955 French film, the Clouseau film.
Yeah, I love that film.
Love that film. It's one of my favorite films. And I was wondering if you felt that particular reference or any other kind of the horror or older classic film influences on the film.
You know, I didn't really pick up on the how do you say it?
Le Diabolique.
Le Diabolique. Yeah. I was going to say Les Diabolicus. I didn't really pick up on that. But when I was watching it, I did pick up on a lot of noirish elements, you know. So I definitely got the 1940s, but except for there was no, I guess, could Vicky be a femme fatale?
She does get punished.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, it does have those more elements.
And she does like use her sexuality quite a lot.
Yeah. So I saw that quite a bit. And then it was only after I learned of the Le Diabolique, the homages, that I actually went back and I saw it. And I thought, that's really, I found it to be kind of subtle, actually. So a nice little homage, because you don't want an homage that's in your face to the point that you think they're just copying this person. But a nice little, like we said, a nice little garnish of homage.
A little bit of like chili flakes. Let's call it like the chili flakes on the House of Sorority Row.
And I kept thinking, like, for the surreal moments, I got some Meshes of the Afternoon vibes. And that was nice. Yeah.
Wow. Really?
I don't know why, but when I was watching it, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is giving me Meshes of the Afternoon, and I love it.
So for anyone listening who hasn't heard of the Meshes of the Afternoon, it's a seminal experimental film by Maya Deren, and it's absolutely fucking gorgeous. And it's almost like a mood film in many ways.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I like the you know, it's like the person, their face is a mirror. I love that so much. I go crazy over that. Like every time I see it, I'm like, it's like when your favorite villain shows up in a movie. I'm like, yeah, there you. I don't know why.
Yeah, I like the fact that so the director of the film, kind of like I mentioned, kind of explicitly talked about Le Diabolique as an influence, and I saw that in the pool bits, but you could also bring, you know, Sunset Boulevard into that with the floating body and the pool as like the site of this crime from the very beginning of the film. But it's also this plotting between women. So without kind of going, Le Diabolique has one of the most famous twists in film history, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, even though it is a film from 1955. But
we want to encourage people to go see it.
Exactly. And it's like one of those films that if someone hasn't seen it and they get to experience it for the first time, whew, I'm so jealous of you because that is a precious twist. But there is a lot of like plotting between women, which obviously happens a lot in this film as well. And kind of as we have been talking about this kind of moral uncertitude, like none of these girls are innocents per se, not just in the very slasher rules kind of way where they do drugs, they party, they have sex, and they're just not, they're a bit more complicated than that, morally speaking. And I think that that's one of the things that makes this film stand out for me.
Yeah, especially from the era it came. Like, it was what, 1983?
Yeah.
1980
1980. It's always a bit fuzzy. I've got it as 1982. But sometimes it like comes out a year later in some places or whatever. So some places put it as 1983.
Yeah, but especially for that era of movies that it's coming from, I think it was very, very much ahead of its time, which, you know, you find with any movie or anything that's ahead of its time, people usually don't like it when it comes out. And it's not until the time catches up to it that it's like, oh, this is actually pretty awesome. And I'm pretty sure the House on Sorority Row did anyone, not anyone, were critics kind to this movie when it first appeared?
Well, I always take that with a pinch of salt because I think that critics traditionally have never been kind to horror films.
Right. No. Critics hate them.
Yeah, and critics traditionally are mostly older men, and they're never kind to anything that centers women.
At all.
Ever. So, like, if you have a combination of those two things, it's never gonna be great, is it? But, yeah, I think they were dismissive of it as just another run-of-the-mill slasher that was capitalizing the success of Halloween and Friday the 13th. And
wait, this is how you know people don't watch stuff.
Yeah.
They just say, oh, it's like this, and that's why it's not good. But this movie's really cool. I would rank it, like, I have my favorite, like, sorority horror films. Of course, because I'm basic, I guess, Black Christmas is at the top. But then right under it is the House on Sorority Row.
Wow, yeah, super hot.
Yeah.
And it definitely had like its legacy. Like, people have been really big fans. And I think, you know, not that he is the end all be all of cinephilia, but Tarantino also really championed this film in the 90s, and subsequently, like, magazines have named it, you know, one of the best slasher films ever made and stuff. But in wider core culture, I don't get the sense that many people talk about this film that much, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't, I mean, it definitely has gotten more love that it deserves over the years, but I think there's always room for more people to be introduced to it and give it a shot, because it really is something. It's a great slasher, but then all those other elements that come in, the surrealism, the not neo-noir, but film noir comes in, and it just makes it like a standalone sort of slasher.
And kind of speaking of its legacy, where do you see the influence of this film on subsequent slasher films that came out later?
You know, I'm sure there are many, but for whatever reason, as I was watching it, I just kept thinking, this is reminding me of I Know What You Did Last Summer.
It's literally the plot of it.
So, and I know that I Know What You Did Last Summer, I think it's based on a book by Lois Duncan. So it doesn't fully count, but it's so similar. You have these rowdy teenagers being kind of thoughtless and reckless, getting someone killed, and their fear and loyalty to each other making them choose to hide the mess they've made, and then the secret coming back to haunt them. I'm sure there's more, but that was the main one that when I was watching, I was like, wow, this is just I Know What You Did Last Summer in a sorority, except it's not last summer because everything happens that same night.
Yeah, it's pretty much that. I was also thinking of other sort of, they're not strictly sorority-based horror films, but they're sort of university or college-based horror films. Like, Scream 2 comes to mind.
Scream 2 was shot. Well, some of the college scenes were shot in Atlanta. I'm just really proud of that, so I just felt like sharing.
Really?
Yeah. Agnes Scott College.
Amazing.
Fun fact.
And I was also thinking of urban legend, like along the lines of this renaissance or second wave of slasher films in the 90s. A lot of them were set in either in high schools or in colleges, or they start off in a high school and then they grow up a little bit and they move away to college, and then shit starts getting really dark and people start dying. So I think it probably influenced directors, filmmakers, screenwriters more than audiences. And we can see traces of that, but nothing kind of specifically replicates it in the same direct way.
It's more like this setting is cool and it has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So let's do it here. Yeah, I see that. I mean, you said urban legend and I was thinking about Joshua Jackson's death scene in that movie and how I think the Dawson's Creek theme song plays for a second on the radio. That was brilliant. Okay.
Oh my god, I'm covering that on the season as well. I'm so looking forward to rewatching that film. I haven't seen it in years.
It's so warm.
Is it gentle violence?
I can't say that I remember a lot of the violence, but when I watch it, I just feel like I'm a kid again, if that makes sense.
It does, because these were the films that I was like, that I would watch as a teenager. And obviously, when you're a teenager and you're watching these supposedly teen horror films, all the teenagers look 27, 30 years old. And you're like, oh, is that what I'm supposed to look like? It's
funny.
No.
I think my phase, because even though I was watching movies I had no business watching at a young age, I think I knew the actors were adults. So I often compared myself to like Disney stars and Nickelodeon stars who were the same age as me. And I would get really mad if they didn't have acne or something. It was like, what are you doing that I'm not doing? You're the same age as me. I was very resentful.
You see, I had like the polar opposites of the Olsen twins, who were kind of roughly my age, but they were, always very rich, traveling all around the world, or going on Vespas with cute Italian boys or stuff like that, or every single film they were in a different country, and that was the whole shtick of their expanded cinematic Olsen
When
universe.
In Rome, Passport to Paris.
Exactly. All of those. I watched all of them. And then the other kind of teenagers were the 90s slasher teenagers, and they were all adults who were really cool and dealing with, murderers and stuff. And I was like, well, I don't really fit into either one of these aesthetics.
I guess I'm normal. My God.
I like it. Unsubscribe from being normal. But we're not going to talk about the remake that came out in 2009 of this film in much detail, but very briefly, kind of, have you seen it? What did you think of it?
I have seen the remake. Well, I've seen part of it. I struggled to finish it. I actually think I still have 30 minutes left.
Wow. Okay. That is all we need to know.
There were aspects to it in the beginning that I kind of liked. Like the party in the beginning is this really over the top Gatsby college party. And sometimes I like things that are over the top, and that was one of those things. But for the most part, despite the great talent, like you got Jamie Chung, Matt O'Leary, the late and great Carrie Fisher. But despite the talent, it just didn't really grab me. But I have to finish it and get back to you on that.
So it's funny that you mentioned the party scene, because we haven't really talked much about the party in this film. But I kind of love it because it looks so fucking lame. It's just a lot of people shuffling around awkwardly, kind of trying to not hold each other on the hips.
Oh my God. So I find that parties in movies, they're one of two extremes. It's either the best party that you wish you were invited to, or it's like, what is this? Is this even a party? What are we doing? And then you have this one where it's the most realistic party I've ever seen, where it's kind of awkward. No one's really doing anything. The band is there.
Terrible. The guy with the peroxide blonde mullet. Oh my god.
Oh my god. His flip-flopping hair is a character of its own, let me tell you. He's just rocking that thing. And I could not look away.
Love them.
I also love in the party scene, you know, where there's that moment where all the girls, they're in different parts of the room and they're looking at each other and the camera's panning over and stopping on one, panning over and stopping. I really like that. It reminded me of like a heist movie almost.
And it's we also kind of I forgot to mention it in our conversation, but one of the things that I think is my favorite thing about this film is the title credits, where we just get these beautiful soft focus kind of close-up shots of these hyper feminine things like activities.
Dude, that's exactly what I wrote down. Like in my notes was like, there's this focus in the beginning of the title cards on all these things that are feminine, you know, someone putting on makeup, shaving her legs, someone blow drying their hair. I really loved that so much.
I love that because it instantly puts us in, you know, we were talking before about like sororities being these, you know, closed off feminine spaces, and this really sets us in that world. It's like, this is about painting your toenails, it's about drying your hair, it's about primping your hair, it's about putting on makeup, putting on lipstick, like all these hyper feminine, getting ready, like putting on your war makeup, basically your like war paint on.
Man, I loved it. Because, like, the first time I saw that, I didn't know what to expect. Like, for older movies, I don't think anyone says, I'm going to watch a trailer for this. You know, you just sort of you go into it. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm in for something good. Let me get my popcorn ready.
Yara, thank you so much. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to mention about the house on Sorority Row that we haven't managed to touch on?
Honestly, the only thing I want to say is I think everyone should watch it. It's a really fantastic slasher movie. Very distinctive. Very smart. I think smarter than it gets credit for.
Yes.
And I would recommend that, you know, if you have finished this episode without having seen the movie, that you get right on that because it's awesome.
You know what? If anyone's finished this episode and they haven't seen this movie, I always respect those choices because I do this a lot where I listen to long podcast episodes about movies that I haven't seen in a long time or at all, and they convince me if they're good episodes to watch the movie with kind of a lot of ideas in mind.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's why I watch video essays. I'm just like, convince me to watch this show or convince me to avoid this show.
Exactly. So, Yara, thank you so much for your time and for your insight on this film and so much more. And for anyone who wants to look up more of your work, where can people find you online?
I'm on YouTube. I'm occasionally on Instagram. And that's about it. Yara Zaid. I live under a rock most days.
Well, we all do. Don't feel self-conscious about that. I will link to your YouTube channel in the description. And when can we look out for your sorority horror essay?
You know, I would love to give you like an exact date, but unfortunately, I'm not that organized. So I'm just going to say this month. It'll definitely be this lovely Halloween season.
Whenever it's out, I will link it in the description as well. So whenever people come to this episode, they can find it there as well.
Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. I want to come back one of these days.
Please
talk about
do.
another horror movie.